Specialist 5th Class James T. Ralston was born on November 12, 1948, in Steubenville, Ohio. Ralston says that it was a quaint little town where everybody knew everybody. He lived in Steubenville for the first 16 years of his life. Then he moved to Murraysville, Pennsylvania, until he enlisted in the Army. Growing up, he lived with his father, who worked in the steel mill, his mother, who was a homemaker, his two brothers, and his sister. He attended Steubenville High School in Steubenville and Franklin Regional High School in Murraysville, where he played football, basketball, baseball, and played the trombone in the school band. After moving from Steubenville, Ohio, to Murraysville, Pennsylvania, Ralston had some trouble adjusting to his new school. He decided that he better do something to straighten himself out and find his way.
I wasn't getting anywhere in school, and I figured I needed to do something to straighten myself out or find my way. So I figured the best thing would be to enlist in the service and go from there.
This is when he made the decision to enlist in the Army. Many of his family members joined the Army, so he followed in their footsteps. That is when he enlisted in the Army, leaving behind his family, his girlfriend Anita, and his job at a brick manufacturing plant. Ralston began attending his 8 weeks of basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, on September 29, 1967. Ralston remembers wearing green Army fatigues and doing a lot of physical activity, like physical exercise, hiking, hand-to-hand combat, rifle training, and camping, which they called bivouac. Ralston says that every day they were busy from 6 in the morning to 5 in the evening, and then they would go to the cafeteria to eat dinner. After that, they went to the barracks. This is where they slept. Ralston describes it as one big, long building with 2 floors. He says that the bunks were lined up in rows, and there was about 40 guys to one area. Overall, Ralston says that he would personally rate the difficulty of his training an 8 out of 10. He says it was tough at times, but he thinks he adapted well, and he enjoyed his time at basic training, even making some lifelong friends while there. After Ralston completed his 8 weeks of basic training, he had to attend another 8 weeks of advanced training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. There he went to school to be a diesel mechanic, and he learned how to fix trucks, tanks, and armored personnel carriers, or most tracked vehicles that can go on any terrain. Once Ralston completed both his basic training and his advanced training, he was ready to go over to Vietnam. Ralston says that he remembers flying over to Vietnam on a contracted commercial carrier named Braniff Airlines. He says that they named their airplanes with different colors. He remembers flying over on the dark green airplane, named the Pickle. Ralston experienced some major life changes when he arrived in Vietnam. He says that it was very hard to get used to the lifestyle, and he remembers that the climate was very different. It was very warm and usually wet outside. Once Ralston was over in Vietnam working, he didn't have much free time anyway, though. He started work every morning at 6 o'clock and worked until he finished, or until dark. They wore green fatigues while working and ate their meals in a mess hall. He recalls that they had good food here, almost like home-cooked meals. After the day was done, they would go to sleep in the barracks. The barracks in Vietnam were different than the ones in basic training, though. This one was 2 guys per room. Some nights he got a lot of sleep, and some nights the men did not get much at all. While working over in Vietnam, Ralston was in the 585th Dump Truck Company, and he was attached to the 18th Engineer Company. Ralston says that the 585th Dump Truck Company's job was to haul dirt, sand, and blacktop to blacktop the roads. It was their job to blacktop the roads because in Vietnam, all the roads were dirt, and if they were blacktop, it would make it much harder for the enemy to place landmines in the roads. Okay. What was the 585th Engineer Company's job?
Our job was to haul dirt, sand. We hauled blacktop to blacktop the roads because the roads were dirt. And we needed the blacktop on the roads to make it more difficult for them to put landmines in the road to blow up our trucks.
Ralston told us that the 18th Brigade's job was to build walls, buildings, and bridges. He says that when the bridges were washed out and they needed that road completed to carry supplies, they would have to rebuild the bridge as quickly as possible. Specifically, Ralston's job in Vietnam was to keep the trucks running and drive the tow truck. If any trucks broke down, he would be responsible for bringing it back to the base and getting it repaired. His main base in Vietnam was in Pleiku, but then he was in Con Tum, Doc To, and South Bam Tuet. On a daily basis, Ralston says that most of the time he traveled with the convoys on the trucks to haul sand from Con Tum back to Pleiku, because if anything were to happen to the trucks, Ralston could fix it. He says that on a daily basis, he used wrenches and parts for trucks. He says that their bridges were made out of steel and had side railings on them for safety, but they were mostly temporary bridges. He recalls that they brought their materials to their working site using some of their 55-ton dump trucks. While completing his job, he says that he carried an M14 rifle and hand grenades with him for safety.
Ralston and the others in Vietnam were a part of the March 1969 Tet Offensive. They encountered some difficult and scary times during the Tet Offensive and throughout war. He mentioned that all he could do was talk to the Lord to help him get through those days, because he never knew what could possibly happen.
Were there?
Well, I was in the March 1969 Tet Offensive.
Okay.
That was pretty intense and scary.
Can you describe that at all?
Well, we were in it, the battle started about midnight and it went on until daybreak. And you'd hear mortars going off, you'd hear artillery flying over your head, you'd hear gunfights. We were a little bit behind. We were on our small base where we're setting up a temporary asphalt plant, and they totally wiped that out. That was totally destroyed. One of my friends got killed because they came right through our line, and pretty much lost a lot of stuff. They didn't bother our dump trucks for some reason. They were sat right there in that same area. But the asphalt plant they destroyed because they knew by destroying that, the dirt roads that we hadn't done yet, they could have easily planted bombs.
Some of his friends that he hung around with and spent his free time with around the base were named Paul Stark, Cruz, John Pratt, and Jim Bivens. In their free time, they went to a nightclub that was right next to their barracks. There, the men could drink beer, shoot pool, and play cards. Also in his free time, he wrote letters to his family, since that was his only source of communication in that time period. The first time that he got the chance to call his family was when he was in his rest and relaxation in Australia. James Ralston was in Vietnam for 1 year, from May 1968 to May 1969. Overall, James Ralston does not know why he or any of the other men were sent to Vietnam, but since he was there, he believed he needed to do his job. Because he did his job, he received medals. These medals included the Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal with 2 bronze stars, and a Marksman Award for his rifle training. James Ralston also received a Service Award. After his service in Vietnam, he was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where he finished out his time in the military. At this point, he could be sent back to Vietnam at any time. During his time at Fort Dix, they stayed in shape and did different exercises such as bivouac to ensure that they would be prepared for any situation that could happen. He finished his service there in Fort Dix in September of 1970. From his experience, James Ralston learned that freedom is not free and that it has to be earned through war. In September 1970, Specialist 5th Class James Ralston traveled back home to Pennsylvania. He moved in with his wife and mother-in-law. His goals at this point were to get a job and to take care of his family. He worked at Ryder Truck as a diesel mechanic because that was the job he was pursuing in the Army. James Ralston and his wife, Nancy, later had 3 children, Tracy, Kevin, and Heather. He and his wife are still currently living in Pennsylvania, and he enjoys the time that he gets to spend with their children and grandchildren.
We would like to thank James Ralston for his military service.